Excellent. So here we are. Finally, we made it happen. Thank you so much, Sami Richard, for joining me here today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, what the work you do and, a little bit about your perspective here in this grand awakening time on our planet.
Thanks, Adam. It's good to have this conversation with you. And it's interesting times we're living in the moment on multiple levels. A bit about my background. I've always been a very free and open thinker. I've always questioned authority right from childhood. And I think I've always been prepared for this time of transition on this planet at this time, although I'm just becoming more conscious of it. And that's really refreshing, I think, to become aware of what's going on during these times and to be able to participate, to help assist humanity at this time and to nurture our own development as well. So that's where my focus is on at the moment, trying to work on both of those aspects, improving myself, ensuring that I'm dealing with all of my personal traumas, shadow, all of this classic cliche kind of stuff that we have to attend to, not just from this life, but on a generational and a soul level as well. And then just kind of integrating and being best positioned to actually serve people from a place of having done that internal work. So really that process was activated for me quite early in life, and I'm really grateful for that. It hasn't come without its struggles, of course. I am blessed, and I to have this insight, I think, and to be able to connect with people such as yourself during this time so that we can get stuck in and really do the work that has to be done, because things are really moving rapidly now, as we're all aware. Any of us who know what's going on in the collective field at the moment with this negative agenda, we're aware now that the cat's out the bag and things are really accelerating. So it's just a case of accelerating our timeline in conjunction with that so that we can start to build these new energies together.
Absolutely. Yeah, brilliant. And that's so much of what it's about, our coming together, this time pooling our resources, not just on a physical level, but on an energetic level, understanding that there is a major access to power available to us in our collective consciousness. So yes, so honored to be here working that with you, brother. Could you maybe share a little bit more about your personal experience, and as much detail or as little as you feel like you want to go into personally, but just like what activated you? How did you come to this level of clarity? Because if I do say so myself, based on the writings that I see you put out there on Facebook and your Telegram channel and everything, you're just profoundly clear, and you're so clear in such a wide spectrum of all of the agendas and what's really going on and the subtle psychological manipulations that go involved with it. It's very refreshing, and I'd be fascinated to learn how you managed to attain that level of clarity.
Sure. Yeah, I didn't plan any of this, believe me. There's been a series of awakenings, if you like to call it that, in my life, starting from political disillusionment, I suppose. I was always having deep conversations with people and trying to get to the bottom of certain things in reality that didn't really make sense to me and that I wanted answers for. So I would always conversate with people in that way, whoever it was who was willing to have those kind of conversations. And one thing led to another. If you couple that with my resistance to authority at school and in the earlier years, the typical things we experience when we're at school with ego and cliques, and just feeling something wasn't quite right there. I felt very out of place. I couldn't communicate it at the time. And I would be good at presenting this ulterior persona, I suppose, to fit in and adapt. But there was always that sense of something not feeling right when I'd be in my own company. And as the years went on, I started to just explore those inclinations for curiosity and do some research and just really trust in my hunches. And then pieces just started to kind of fall into place, especially pertaining to what's going on with this negative agenda and the global establishment, and kind of being able to draw the links between all these industries and not see them as separate. I always felt averse to kind of the business world and the way economics operated and all of this. And I just felt it lacked this magic. This is what I've always loved, and it is the magic of life, like feeling this connection to the mystery of and spontaneity and creativity of life that I felt was having to be suppressed. And as children, we all feel this to some degree, but it gets stifled out of us. And most of us aren't aware that that's happened. I feel coming into my teenage years, I was conscious of the fact that things were changing. Of course, the collective was changing as well. So we have to take that into account. There was lots of changes with technology and all of this that we have to consider in that as well. But on a personal level, I felt as I got older, I was losing that spark, and that really stimulated me to ask the right questions, which led me to the right answers intuitively. And so it effortlessly unfolded from there. And then I was plunged into a kind of dark night of the soul period for a year or two, where I really struggled with mental health and just trying to grapple all of this and reconcile the truth of the shadow in my life, because it felt very consuming then. I didn't have the spiritual awareness nurtured to a sufficient enough degree to be able to feel confident in being able to overcome all of these challenges. So it was really a case of having to just embrace that process and hit the rock bottom to then come out the other side stronger. And luckily that led me into this spiritual awakening where I discovered the, synchronicities and all of these supernatural phenomena that seem to be happening. That really expanded my awareness beyond this limited container of control system that I felt was swallowing us all whole. So there was a period I felt like I needed to stand on the rooftops and shout my truth to everyone to get them to wake up. That's where we all go through that. After a while, having tuned into the spiritual aspects, I learned over time to practice discernment, to know when it's appropriate to spread my truth, to understand what resonance is and who I should be investing energy in. And from there, I could restructure my life and my relationships to reflect my more authentic self that was starting to come out. And from then on, really, it's just been a process of spirals of awakening, returning back to myself, shedding some layers of ego, becoming more in tune with myself. And always accompanying that is the gift of greater insight, which I've then luckily found a way to communicate and share with others. And that's what's led me to where I am today.
That's so excellent. I love that is, the explanation of your process, or rather the process itself, meaning, it's very understandable. It's very almost, accessible in the ways that I think a lot of people could identify with that, because I think a lot of people have gone through that process, the dark night of the soul, rock bottom, sort of like hopelessness, to trigger an awakening deeper, which almost always requires some degree of faith, trust, connection with these higher powers that maybe are not so obvious that they're ever present in this very murky landscape, but they are. And that is, of course, the deeper part of the spiritual imperative, to make those accommodations or make those shifts, like you mentioned, shifting your life and your lifestyle and the connections and the relationships that you've had to support more of this new system, or the fully integrated divine human, whatever you want to call it. Now, I think it's also really interesting, your relationship to authority and the status quo. Particularly when we look at some of the astrological aspects. So, I am a metaphysician as well as astrologer, yoga teacher, all these different things. And it's so powerful in my experience to connect the mundane world with the, supernatural, so to speak, right? And in this case, with astrology and just metaphysics in general, we can start to piece things together that might not be in the seen realms, but they're still very much present and still interacting with us, even if we can't see them. And so this sense that you had of the control structure of the status quo, in astrology, we relate it mostly to Capricorn. because Capricorn is very much the status quo, corporate America, or just corporatocracy in general, right? This sort of top-down pyramid, you know, one person in charge of all the other people, and then the ones at the bottom are really, you know, the serfs or the slaves of that pyramid system. And so, you know, we actually have some aspects happening right now that are pretty powerful. Of course, we've had Pluto, which is the planet of death, rebirth, and transformation. So wherever Pluto goes, it's going to destroy things and help them grow back essentially in a more evolved or more enlightened state. But the destruction is a necessary part of that process. We can also think of it as the Phoenix energy, right? Creating a fire and then something being reborn from the ashes. And so Pluto has been moving through Capricorn since 2008. And this is in Western astrology. You know, if there are other schools of astrology where it might differ a little bit, but since 2008, that's when we started having the banking crisis and, you know, all these different things, right? So we're having all of this purgative effect with Pluto moving through the sign of Capricorn. We also have it about to conjunct the United States' natal Pluto in Capricorn. So we're coming to what's called the Pluto return, which basically means we're going to be reborn as a nation. Now, the possibility for destruction also exists, but there is also that possibility for rebirth. And as if that wasn't enough, we currently have Venus is about to approach a conjunction with Pluto tomorrow. Today is the 9th of December, 2021. Tomorrow, Venus will conjunct Pluto. And Venus is love, relationships, our values, money, finances, and resources, right? And Pluto is, of course, that death and rebirth energy we just mentioned. So there's a connection that's going to happen tomorrow, but it's not just going to be for tomorrow because Venus is currently stationing to go retrograde. So a little bit about that, right? People hear about Mercury retrograde all the time. It's basically when the planet apparently pauses in the sky and then it looks like it's going backwards. That apparent backward motion basically gives us an opportunity to really go deep with that planet and the sign it's currently retrograding through, so that we can sort of mine all the possible goodies of reviewing, revisiting, revising, and revitalizing our relationship with those planets and their energies. So Venus approaching a conjunction to Pluto tomorrow, well, then she is currently already stationing. She's slowing down in that relative motion, right? And then on the 19th of December, she will retrograde. And then she will also still be conjunct with Pluto and continue to be conjunct with Pluto over the course of a few weeks because of the slow motion of that retrograde. So everything related to Venus and Pluto is going to be really highlighted the next couple of weeks. And it's going to have a lot to do with the authority structures, you know, the system, the financial system, even possibly. It's very likely that we will have a new relationship to money as a result of this transit. You know, there's possible reevaluations with cryptocurrency and things like this on the horizon. But more important than anything, and to finish up my point, it's about how we relate to or value the systems of authority and the status quo. And over the next few weeks, this is going to be transformed. Hopefully, you know, what this means for people like you or myself, that the larger part of the population will awaken to these negative agendas and stop valuing false authority, right? To actually come into the spiritual potential of claiming our own innate divine authority, which, you know, is available to us for those of us who choose it. Of course, people like yourself and myself are already on that line, probably because of a healthy distrust of authority. And it does seem to be like a lot of people who are getting caught in this system have just an unrealistic or unwise trust in authority. But, you know, I'll pause there and let you share some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, that's it's important to expand our awareness to encompass the macrocosm, so planetary alignments, because it's easy to get caught up and to think everything's just happening to us, or you know, that there isn't other forces at play, and that has both polarities, of course, and that's links to what you said about the necessity for destruction, I suppose, because our planet's on its own evolutionary course, as is the solar system, and everything's a microcosm of microcosm of everything else. So we have to kind of consider all possibilities, and yeah, what you're describing does seem to be happening right in lifetime right now, especially pertaining to authority and the importance of more people to shift to this distrust that we've already luckily experienced, and that will require more chaos and destruction, and that is what these planetary shifts are all about, because we are on this kind of ultimate cycle of learning when you take a wider vantage point. And we are in a realm of duality, and the one polarity can't exist without the other until they've been synthesized. So if we can become aware of how we engage with this process so that we don't get consumed by the dark side, and we can recognize why it's playing out in terms of what it's teaching us. That's not to condone the suffering that happens in the world, but it's got to that point now where we have to be shaken out of our slumber through an uprooting of our sense of stability and what we cling on to, and to start embracing the unknown, start embracing the mystery of life, so that we can start to create a new world with our imaginations instead of letting things happen to us and being victims of fate. And of course, these social engineers, they have a good grasp of astrology, and they wield this against us. They know how these planets work and how they influence us on our birth charts. So we really need to tune into those aspects, because ultimately they're the metaphysical, spiritual aspects of ourselves that we've been suppressing, that we need to now understand from a wider vantage point, because the divine is working through us all. And it's easy when we're stuck in this myopic perception of the world and the physical reality to just think, oh, you know, it's just poor little me against the world, and then we feel helpless in the face of these changes. But when we start to see it through that lens and understand that there's higher forces that are working, that are available to us, well, if we choose to tune into it, which, like you said, some of us have already done, and the world really starts to open up, and we start to lose that fear about these changes, because we understand how this cycle's unfolding. And who knows, we've probably been here before at some point, but every cycle's different. I don't believe we just repeat the exact same thing, because we're subject to so much free will, right? So what happened in one reality isn't going to play out exactly the same. The interesting thing is, can we learn from our past mistakes? Can we recover all these lost aspects, suppressed aspects of the collective unconscious, and retrieve a truer understanding of our history, not just on a personal soul level, but on a collective level? And this is really the gateway to trying to transform in this particular cycle, because we can look at past cycles perhaps and see where maybe we hadn't fully integrated, maybe the masculine feminine components were still in balance. So if we can take the best aspects of these cycles, and this one, of course, because this is the most important, then we can position ourselves now to finally break out of this dense frequency that we're still contained within.
Yes, well said. It's a couple of things there. The notion that the social engineers are aware of astrology, absolutely. You know, I actually wrote a quote in my book. I'm not a fan of JP Morgan in particular, but given the fact that he was the one who said this, it felt really relevant to share in the work. It's so his quote is, "Millionaires don't use astrology, billionaires do." Right? So he knows. And of course, the rest of the social engineers know. And I love the point you made about, you know, history repeating itself, but or of sorts, right? I've heard this before. It's not my original thought, but I think it's just so fitting. History doesn't repeat exactly so much as it rhymes, right? So there is a similar pattern that shows up, but there's a slight alteration or variability that comes in each new incarnation, right? So this time around, you know, who knows what the specific details are, but we are poised with the same opportunity to become more sovereign, become more loving, become more integrated, become more balanced between our divine masculine and divine feminine, or rising up at least out of the shadow feminine, shadow masculine, understanding that there are these dynamics, and that the whole battle of the sexes and the separation consciousness, the divide and conquer, is the single greatest tool that the darkness uses to keep us out of alignment, to keep us, you know, in fear and separation consciousness, which of course, you know, Pluto and the ruler of Scorpio and all of those energies, Pluto, Scorpio, a house of astrology, all deal with fear. And the fear of death is one of the biggest ones, right? But when we understand that that death is just a transition, that it's that crucible or that transformational alchemy that we can go through, we might even be able to gain some benefit to that process without transitioning in the physical body. We can actually die to a fear that we've had, or to, you know, a false belief that we've had, or a false interpretation of the world. You know, so all of these things are available to us. I'd be curious to know what you think is maybe the most vital or pivotal piece of information for people to have at this time, or perhaps, a practical approach, what people could be doing for themselves to raise their vibration, or to, meet these challenges that we're seeing in the world in a more empowered and sovereign place?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends where you're positioned in terms of your understanding of what's going on. And when I speak to people, I try and tailor it according to their level of consciousness. Of course, I learn from other people as well.
Mhm.
So if we're coming from a kind of ground level and we're new to the understanding of this control system, we do want to be taking practical measures first and foremost, because that is where the fear is deeply rooted in those lower chakras, right?
Mm.
So it's this survival instinct, fear related to what you said astrologically as well. We need to overcome these fears first. And to do that, we need to feel like we have our foundations in place. So not everyone works in that direction. Some people come from the higher centers and work down. I would say, although I did learn about the establishment first, I feel like my higher centers have always been quite activated, and it's been more of a case of embodying and grounding. But certainly now, with this destabilization going on to this degree, there's a lot of fear in the air at the moment pertaining to basic survival instinct. And if we're still experiencing that, we really need to try and check in with ourselves and it's not easy to just open up spiritually. Sometimes we have to be triggered into that through a catalyst, but there will be those triggers emerging during these times, because there has to be. We all have to look for answers when we feel so disillusioned, right? So what I'd recommend really is just focusing first and foremost on creating a safe reality container for yourself. And that involves restructuring relationships, being honest about what relationships are serving us and which ones we're still attached to as a compensation mechanism. That's a really important step, because otherwise we're absorbing all of these external energies still, which are still reflecting our unconscious that hasn't been integrated. So we're also participating in it, and we have to take some accountability. The more we can bring consciousness to where the relationships are actually reflecting our authentic aspect as we shed more layers of the ego, the easier it becomes to navigate reality during these times, because we don't have to deal with these issues. And that also applies to romantic relationships. A lot of people are very, very engrossed in these dramas still at the moment with relationships, and it's unavoidable. We've all been through it, because like you said, the masculine feminine distortions and masculine feminine energies are some of the most important aspects of reality, and that plays out through our romantic encounters. So I think during this time we want to be freeing up as much energy as we can to invest in activating our unique purpose, and not spending too much trying to resolve dramas, because a drama is teaching us that something's not quite aligned. So there's still a seed of truth in that experience, of course, that we can take. But it gets to that point where we have to just be honest. Okay, I need to walk this alone for a little while. I need to get my stuff together now, so that I can become an anchor point from which to attract better experiences and more aligned people who are in resonance, that then we can start expanding our field of reality to encompass a wider environment. And that way we are positioning ourselves to not be as affected by these, all these external frequencies that are being bombarded and exploiting our blind spots by playing upon all of our traumas. So as we go through that process, starting with the simple things, which can be hard, they're simple, but they're hard. And this includes resolving any addictions, any attachments we have to things that we feel we need, whether that be entertainment, TV, alcohol, smoking, drugs, masturbation, you name it, all of these forms of things that just siphon our energy. We need to try and reorganize our internal energy, reconnect to that flow of energy. Then we can move into the spiritual domains and start to understand the interplay of the masculine feminine components. We can start to understand what sexual energy truly is, how it circulates within the body and aligns our chakras. So it's a case of kind of working from the ground up. And the more that we do that, the more we invite in new learning experiences that our soul's now equipped to deal with. And then we find we're almost creating our own timeline, personal timeline, that's more in accordance with our soul's blueprint and not a reflection of these negative ego programs that have been conditioned into us that we're still unconsciously responding to without obviously our awareness of it.
Just a little round of applause there, because I felt so resonant with that. I also really love and appreciate how you brought in the relationship dynamic, as well as some of the values that we have, you know, relationships with substances or things that we might be addicted to, as these are all going to be very highlighted during this Venus Pluto conjunction and the revitalization of these energies. Such a powerful practice. You know, I really love what you said about being mindful of the kinds of relationships and connections that we have. I actually personally have Venus retrograde in my chart. When I was born, Venus was retrograde in the sign of Leo. And I've spent a lot of my life in this incarnation in the earlier years. Usually when you have a natal planet that's retrograde, it starts to turn around after about 30, 35, 36. But for the first, you know, portion of this incarnation, relationships were a huge source of anguish or stress for me, and the experience of drama, and having to learn to navigate those relationships to the point where now naturally, even though, as you said, it's not easy, it is simple though, I have restructured my relationships in my life to no longer give people infinite positions to be abusive or to be neglectful or to be, you know, running their own ego operating programs, right? You can actually be too forgiving. And that was one of my challenges in the past. And so I've learned, you know, I can still love people and still care for them and still even be friendly with them, but from afar. And of course, you know, that brings up other challenges. It's like, oh, well, I feel alone, you know, I have to cut all these relationships out. So then I'm just here by myself. And then that brings up another layer of the experience. It's like, well, what is our relationship with ourself like? How do we relate to our own personality, our own self-talk? Are we supportive in ourselves, or are we constantly, you know, doing the matrix's work for it by gaslighting ourselves and diminishing ourselves and, you know, minimizing our contributions and maximizing our flaws? So I feel like a big component to that might be available to some people. You know, it depends on how you want to approach it, right? Because you mentioned there's a top down and then a down up. But for the most part, from my understanding, you know, whatever you want to call it, if you want to call it your higher self, if you want to call it the higher power, if you want to call it God of the universe, if you just want to call it universal love or self-love, that willingness and capacity to embody love within the self for no other reason, for no external, is a huge gateway and bridge to be able to hold space for ourselves and not invite in lesser relationships simply because we're feeling lonely or bored or scared or whatever, right? Some degree of codependency running the show. So if we can actually access these energetics, you know, you could talk about pranayama, you could talk about yoga, you could talk about eating properly, but you could even just say higher self, God, whatever you want to call it. Fill me with more love. Show me how to be more loving with myself. Show me how to love myself enough so that I don't invite in, you know, psychic or emotional vampires into my life to then prove to me how unlovable I am. Because a lot of people are still running these programs of unworthiness, because that's one of the core programs of the Matrix, of course, right? I mean, how else could you get a whole race of beings to enslave themselves, except if to make them feel that they are unworthy and lowly and need someone else to guide them, right? So that unworthiness program is one of the core programs of the Matrix, and everything else is built off of it, right? The crappy relationships, the, you know, addictive components, because we're not in contact with the source within. So whatever names you want to put on it, that experience of getting in touch with our inner source, inner love, any name you want to put on it, is going to empower us to not fall back into these kinds of relationships, the kind of drama where it actually distracts us and pulls us away from our soul journey. So I just wanted to share that now, as far as like a top down or ground up, like practical approach, because I know a lot of this stuff can be very woo woo to some people, or it just sounds too philosophical to be practical, but there are actually practical steps. So actually asking your higher self, your God, your higher power, whatever name you want to put on it, understanding that there is some force outside of you that you also work with and works through you, asking it to intervene. You can also call it angels. I mean, you know, there's some people who say that the angels are bad, I think it's pretty clear if you have a clear intention for upliftment for yourself and others, that's all you need to focus on or, intent. And so calling upon the higher powers, that can be a way to access this love and actually have it show up. As long as we're patient and willing to receive it, then it can present itself in miraculous ways. But if you want to also talk about specific practical things, on a chakra level, right? Opening up to the crown chakra, inviting a universal energy into our body and fully into the heart center, right? Where we experience love here in this dimension. That can be an excellent empowered way, right? The top down way. And then from the ground up way, we can actually connect with the earth herself, and this is where the Gnostics and the ancient seers, and lots of metaphysically minded humans over the course of eons were ahead of the curve because they understood that the planet herself, Gaia, Sophia, whatever name you want to put on it, Terra, doesn't matter. She's a conscious living being. And she's in fact the closest conscious living being that we can access. Yes, the sun is another. He represents the divine masculine principle, right? But he's actually a little bit more remote, far, far away. We can go right underneath our feet and contact this divine loving energy, which I personally have experienced before. I'm sure lots of other people have as well. And that has more to do with the root chakra, right? Opening up the energy from the soles of your feet and your tailbone and inviting that loving earthy energy of this divine goddess underneath our feet to support us, to have us feel grounded, safe, and secure. And we can even invite in more of the life force energy through this way. And then we don't feel the need to attach externally to get that sense of security because it's self-contained and it's coming from the source.
Yeah, nicely said. We can integrate it in either direction. There is misconceptions from different vantage points depending on what you find easiest. If you're naturally predisposed more into the abstract domains, it's going to seem more favorable to operate on those levels. Whereas if you're more grounded and sensory in your experience, then those aspects of reality may seem a bit, woo, like you said. But really, we need to understand that all of these chakras are interrelated. They're all energetic vortices that are feeding into one another in this kind of like Kundalini spiral, I suppose. And wherever we feel we need to work hardest is where our energy should be more focused on. And some of us can get lost in these higher centers to the point of becoming very unrooted from the earth, which, like you said, is the access point through the earth, through the lower chakras into our body. So the more grounded we feel, the more we feel that visceral connection to the mother, to the earth, the living organism, which is an aspect of ourselves as well. And like you said, well said, it's definitely our closest contact point from an ethereal standpoint. So it's really refreshing if we're coming from the spiritual levels to actually understand the importance of finding our feet on the ground like that and really being able to synthesize all of these energies. And that state of harmony, when we can bring these two forces into balance, will ultimately open the heart, because the heart is the center point of the 7 primary chakras. So when we bring the top and the lower 3s together, we start to open that field wider. We feel a natural connection to our environment. We feel a natural connection to each other. And then we experience more loving and compassionate states from which we're then propelled into serving the divine will from a place of embodiment and not disconnection through being overly skewed in one direction or the other.
Absolutely. Yes. It's so much about that balance and integration of our being and all the multidimensional aspects of it, right? Because we're not one thing by any means, human beings. And there's one other point I wanted to share about that goddess energy, right? Because when we're talking about Venus, we're also talking about the goddess energy. She's the ruler of Taurus, and Taurus is something of the earth goddess vibration, right? So it's a perfect example that, this period of time ahead of us is going to give us the opportunity to restructure that relationship with the divine goddess. Now, on a practical level, we might feel disconnected. One of the other core programs, in addition to like unworthiness, is it's kind of the same thing, but just in different words, the I'm not enough, which then also leads to the experience of not having enough, not being enough, not having enough money, time, love, etc. Right? But that's part of the program and the insidious nature of it, that when we can get caught in a loop, will we manifest from that perception, right? So here's where the capacity for choice can make a huge impact on our lived experience. Because yes, everyone has challenges and benefits in their life. People who are more programmed by the system tend to get more fixated and obsessive about the negative and overlook or even not even witness or experience any of the positives. So there's always something to be grateful for. Now, that being said, if you're in despair or anguish or fear, gratitude is kind of a large jump. But if you're finding yourself in a neutral place, or you just want to invite in more support from the universe, you can start to just make little lists of things that you're grateful for. Oh, I'm grateful to be breathing fully right now. I'm grateful that I have a place to live. I'm grateful that I have food in my belly. I'm grateful that the goddess has given me X, Y, and Z. And actually starting to count your blessings, literally being aware that there are maybe more blessings than you might have seen before in that negative mind frame, right? This is where we can actually start to realign with our higher purpose and potentials and start to connect with the higher manifestation that's available for us. But if we're continuing to run the old program of negativity and not enough and low self-worth, we will assuredly manifest that, because that's the power of our subconscious in particular, right? So these are some ways that we can actually take practical steps, just even sending gratitude to the earth herself. Thank you for all that you give us, all of the food, all of the life, everything that we have, essentially, aside from the sun feeding it and sourcing this, has been given to us by the planet herself. So we have so much to be grateful for there. There's always an opportunity to connect with that root and that grounded sense of security, knowing that she loves and supports us, but the universe loves gratitude. And just like we as humans love gratitude, right? Think about a relationship where someone really appreciates all that you do versus a relationship where someone never is grateful for all the stuff that you do, right? Well, we have that same relationship with the planet herself. Let's use it to our benefit and not our detriment any longer.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, gratitude is something we really need to strengthen, because there's a lot going on in the world that can affect us negatively. And it, like you said earlier, we always have the choice. Are we choosing to attach to those negative experiences, or can we reframe our perception about what they represent in terms of, again, learning lessons? I know that can be a cop-out sometimes, but there is always a lesson in the struggle. And if we can just, I try, like in my own gratitude practice, when I'm lying in bed, maybe I'm having a bit of a tough time sleeping because I'm very overactivated. I've got a lot of things coming in. I'll just take that time to lie on my back and just relax and start to count my blessings. And everyone can do that in their own way. And like you said, it is a practical, it's a practical thing that we can all do in whatever way suits us. Some people might feel that connection to nature, like physical nature, and they like going for walks. They might be a very grounded person in that respect. But showing appreciation for nature is showing appreciation for spirit, because spirit is contained within the nature, still another expression of consciousness. And that's why we feel this innate connection to nature. And this is why they're trying to strip that from us. So we can also reconnect by actually spending more time in these environments just to get that reset. And naturally, we will feel more grateful, because the gratitude is our natural state when we're surrounded by this beauty and activated by it. But even in times of struggle, we can just remind ourselves of the very simple things, like you said, that the goddess is there to provide for us, where we are supported, and that divine guidance is always there for us if we seek it. But if we are stuck in these mental programs and we lack the belief and the self-worth, then we're creating a block, and we're not allowing ourselves to channel that wisdom through our vessel. And therefore we will fall into these mental loops where we struggle to feel gratitude for anything, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and we start to attract the very thing that we're holding in our minds. And that's the greatest aspect of this war on consciousness, is trying to hijack the mind so that we manifest our own demise. So by reclaiming our understanding of the way that our mind creates reality is very important in being able to change what we experience, not just in terms of our physical expression, but the way we perceive what's happening to us. That's the most important first step. Once we accept where we are, then we can change.
The power of perception cannot be overstated, really. And this is our linchpin, or our wild card when it comes to this. I don't even necessarily, yeah, it's a war on consciousness, whatever. Like, it's just this eternal push and pull between the light and the dark. And yoga teaches us it's one of the most important things. Thoughts are things, and what we think about, we bring about. It's a function of that. Now, actually stepping up into sovereignty in our minds and recognizing that the playing field in our minds is where all of this is decided is such a huge and pivotal component. So I love that you're really clear on that. I think you do it really well. I mean, you just summarize so much of this so powerfully, so well. And I'm just thinking for some of the last thoughts that we have for here today. Just share what's on your mind. What final thoughts you think people would like to hear or benefit from, or just stuff that you see a lot in the collective that you'd like to address.
I think ultimately we need to embrace these times. And again, back to the perception thing, it's very easy to look at what's going on external appearances and feel very helpless in the face of everything, because there is this dark polarity intensifying, but there is the light polarity that's also simultaneously intensifying. And these dual forces are in a weird relationship with one another in this, like you said, this kind of pull and pull, but eventually they need to reintegrate and reconnect, so that we can access a conscious awareness of our true nature. And this is what we're lacking, like you said, with the mind. It's like we actually understood what our minds are, that they're the tool to create our reality through the imagination and to co-create by connecting through resonance with one another. That would naturally elevate our vibrational state by synthesizing the darkness, because we'd understand that the darkness can't control us unless we consent to it. When we withdraw our consent, then it starts to just crumble. And people ask, well, what can I do to overcome this control system? You don't really have to do anything in terms of fighting. We don't need to project this resistant energy onto anything. We just need to use what's going on to strengthen our understanding, and then things will naturally start to change. I'm not saying we shouldn't take any action. Of course, we have to participate in speaking our truth, doing our bit where we can in whatever way it works for us. We've all got our own unique role on the planet at this time based on our soul's frequency and journey. But if we can just keep the attention focused on what we need to do to nurture that development of our souls, and this is multiplied within the collective field, and we start forming these networks and connections, then we'll find that this old paradigm continues to crumble and the old systems will die, because they can no longer keep up with the new frequency that we're operating on. And that's how I think is a good perspective to approach this from, as things start to become even more chaotic. And I do believe when it comes to the bigger picture that we do have what it takes, but it won't come without the personal effort and the collective effort as well.
Yeah, it's just a powerful time. And just to reconnect with that Scorpio energy and the Pluto energy, it's like volcanic, right? Bringing that stuff up from the surface, which it can bring destruction to towns, but then there's new land, there's new life that comes from that transformation process. And so with this, there are plenty of people you might have also heard, and that's not to take away or minimize all the suffering and the challenges that people have experienced over the past couple of years. But I've also heard probably, if not equal amounts, if not more people say how much of a blessing COVID was for them in all these different ways, right? And on a collective level, it is actually a blessing, despite the fact that, yes, there are people who are, casualties and getting injured and, having physical negative repercussions because of this landscape that we're in. Yet at the same time, it's galvanizing the awakening process. It's showing people more obviously that these control structures were always there, but now they're just becoming much more stark. So these are the, you know, silver linings. Even though it doesn't look silver, it looks pretty dark, there's still something good and positive that can be mined through that process, because that's how life works, right? I mean, you know, there's always a negative to a positive, and that polarity is a part of the third dimensional experience. So if we can just remain with the clarity of mind to understand that just because something appears to be negative doesn't mean that it's ultimately negative or that will always remain that way. And we have
Exactly.
a lot to work with inside of that, actually, then. So thank you so much, Sami, for coming on today. You really just have such a brilliance that I just wanted to share and put out there. Feel
Thanks,
free
Adam.
to let me know, you know, or let our viewers know how to get in touch with you, you know, if you want to book any sessions or things like that.
Yeah, sure. So you can find me on Facebook, Sami Richard, that's SAMI. Share a lot of my writing on there. Some of you may be familiar already with that. And then I've got my own personal brand, if you want to call it that, Shifting Timeline, which seems pretty apt for this conversation. That's Shifting Timeline. And you can find me on Telegram at Shifting Timeline, or my website, shiftingtimeline.com. I'm looking to continue to build the material on there to help educate people, provide a safe space. And if you feel called to, you can book one-to-one sessions with me through the website on the sessions section. And I've been having some very powerful conversations with people in that space at the moment to really get to the root of some underlying blockages that are still just preventing accessing our highest potential.
Excellent. Fantastic. Well, again, thank you so much, Sami. I look forward
Thank you, Adam.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
nice talking to you.
likewise, you just have such a wealth of knowledge. I'm just so honored to be able to receive it.
And
And
so I really like your astrological perspective as well. I've kept up with some of the stuff you've posted as well, and that helps to inform me as well. And I'm always interested to learn more about that. So yeah, thank you for sharing those aspects as well.
Thank you for receiving them. Yeah, I mean, the best, you know, that we can do, all relevant and useful information to support this awakening process, right?
Exactly.
So thanks again, Sami. Thank you everyone for watching, and stay tuned for more.
Take care, brother.
Bye.